children that are brought up by their parents and children that are brought up by their grandparents. Many of us in West Africa, especially in Nigeria, when we have parents that are still alive, usually once our children are born, we want them to spend time with with their grandparents. And if they spend long time with their grandparents, for instance, if they have school and everything with their grandparents, you find out that the children that are born, that are groomed by the grandparents, are different in intellectualism, in wisdom and perception than the children that are groomed by normal, you as a parent. So what happens in this case is that usually the grandparents do a lot of transfer of knowledge. They do a lot of transfer of knowledge. They do a lot of transfer of knowledge. They transfer knowledge to the grandchildren. And we may not know why this is happening, but if you have been a parent, we could assume that usually for them as parents, you as a parent, because you are busy trying to make money to pay school fees, you don't really have time to sit down with your children to share this thing. But as a grandparent, you find out that you brought up your own children, and maybe there are some secrets or some life skills that you didn't even pass to your own immediate children, and you feel that, oh, your life is going, and they use this opportunity to share information, to share a lot of perceptions with their grandchildren. So, for instance, I had this discussion in one of my papers that I presented in another conference. The title was "Naming Systems in These Cultures." Young people, yes, it was naming system in these cultures. Then we also have Oyerunke Oyewumi, 1979, when she talked about the making of a woman. She has a strong conception of the Yoruba concept of seniority, which is very strong among Africans, the concept of seniority. So here you find out that also because the idea of being an Agba, a senior, is so revered, you find out that even young people want to quickly be known as Agba. So before you know it, once they have a child, they call them Iya somebody in the Yoruba part of the world of West Africa. Once you have a child, doesn't matter whether it's a girl or a boy, you are called Iya somebody, you are called Father somebody, you know. But in my own side of Nigeria, you maintain your identity. Doesn't matter whether you have children or not. And these have social implications, but that's not our focus. But I'm just trying to bring about the idea that being an Agba is revered and has regard. So again, the general belief, look, yes. So talking about the general belief, we can do a comparative analysis between the way elders are treated in the Western world and the way elders are treated in African society. We find out that there is more regard, more reverence, and more respect given to elders. For instance, in my own culture, among the Isoko people of West Africa, you find out that elders are, when you are an elder, especially when you get to a certain age, there's a celebration that is done when you get to 100. It's like a town party. It's more than just having a birthday. And for such a person, his words are very, very regarded because there's this concept or this belief that elder people do not talk so much. And because they don't talk so much, they have the capacity to see more. So as a result of that, they talk less. Then when they get to talk, people pay attention to what they say. So for instance, among the Yorubas, they call it Ojuagba or Okogbon, as in Yorubas, they believe that an elderly person is a component of a faculty of knowledge. So that's why you see among the Yorubas, a professor is called Odogbon. Odogbon is somebody that is full of wisdom. So the aim of this paper is to review new approaches to curriculum development in West Africa or African universities, and to introduce indigenous knowledge base like Ogboagba, wisdom of the elders, and how to include modules like Oju Ogbon, elderly perception, Ikoko Ogbon, and pot of knowledge, and Odogbon, that's the idea of full of wisdom. And the objective is to explore indigenous epistemologies of Ogbon and Imo. In Yoruba, there are two types of, Ogbon is wisdom, Imo is knowing. So there's Ogbon and there's Imo. So these two things are different. So it doesn't mean that every Agba or an elderly person is wise, but people begin to judge what you say, because among the Yoruba, you hear things like, oh, what an elder sits down to see, a young man climbing the tree will not get to see. So those kind of sayings are sayings that revere and regard the ideas of being an elder. So the work also tries to interrogate Western theories that become dysfunctional when they get to the African setting. It examines how indigenous epistemologies could help resolve differences between theory, which are Western, and application when they come to African countries. To determine how universities can incorporate indigenous knowledge base for sustainable educational studies, and to conclude on how African universities should approach indigenous ideas for development as school curriculum, and to recommend how students can create a balance between the two. So the method is ethnographic debates, which engages Agbas. That's a lot of seniors in some of the conversations and some of the debates. So the sagacistic debate serves as critical and philosophical analysis, invitations to stand squares to facilitate and share ideas, interrogation and comparison of ideas between the Western and Southern approaches that engages network for the universities in practice for collaboration for the generations and next generation. So for instance, exploring the idea of Agba. Like I said before when I was talking about the foundation, in many West African countries, the ontology and belief in being an Agba, you know, there's a certain age you get to and people don't take you lightly. The age difference and the idea of regard for age is very important. I've talked about the difference between children that are brought up by their parents and those that are brought up by the grandparents. Yeah, so I can give an example here. I have a girl, an acquaintance, whom I realized that her siblings were calling her grandma. And I'm like, she's not even married, she's a single parent, but her siblings are calling her grandma. If you get to relate with that kind of person, you'll find out that probably she has so much wisdom. That's what gave her that tag, that label, grandma. So I also have some case studies that shows a dysfunction between the wisdom of Western theories and African application. So for instance, in Nigeria, we have the popular Julius Berger. Julius Berger is a construction company that does a lot of construction in Nigeria. And so there's this place in Ikorodu, Nigeria, where it was said to be Julius Berger burial place, burial ground. What happened? At this particular bridge, it was said that the belief is that Julius Berger company kept working on that bridge, and every time they build the bridge collapses. There was a force of nature working in that bridge, and these builders didn't know. So they had to get the secrets of what is happening in this place before they could set up a bridge. And I guess that at the end, that place was also discovered. That place also became his burial ground. I'm not going to talk about the myths about burial or no burial, but the issue is the fact that how much labor was wasted, how much resources were wasted in that place before they got it right. Again, in Ikorodu, we had this road that crossed water. You know, every time it rains, everybody that knows Lagos knows that sometimes we have flood when there are torrential rains. And then this road gets flooded. So sometime 10 years ago, the government decided that they wanted to bring Chinese to come and work on the road. So guess what they did? The work they did on the road is not so apparent, it's not so different, other than the fact that because the road crosses a river, they built the road over the bridge. So whenever it rains, we don't have that problem anymore. So that is a force that was not recognized by the former builders. So every time they do this job, the thing is destroyed. Another way, again, let's talk about the difference, our COVID story. You know that many of us during the time of COVID, in short, the belief is that people that went to the hospital actually died. But people that stayed at home didn't get to die. What were they doing? They were applying herbs. We have, for me, when I travel, yes, I have it here. I travel with a lot of things. For instance, among the indigenous cultures, they have things, though not well researched, but some of them are being researched. And what are all those things? There are things that are used for simple things like anti-aging cream, anti-aging lotions. For instance, simple turmeric. And then I remember that because I was also getting to 50, my elder sister shared a story with me, and she said she had a crisis because of menopause. And then her husband took her to all the hospitals, and she didn't get any feedback until they went to a hospital that the doctor started applying herbal treatment with a medical English treatment. Guess what? She got well. So this is the gap between the knowledge of the elders and those Western theories, which if they know and incorporate, it will be less frustrating to move forward. It will be more productive for us. So this shows that African researchers need to do a lot more about our products and things and our ways of life and the stories, because these things are the idea of forces and theory of forces in Africa cannot be overlooked. Ontologically, eldership and seniority, like we said, is regarded and they believe to have perception. So when African indigenous researchers, African engineers, African medical practitioners, when they want to do these things, wouldn't it be nice to go to the town square and invite the elders and say, let's have a conversation around these things? I had another paper that I shared, and I talked about it's called Grandma's Embrace. There I talked about the importance of creating healthy spaces where if you live with a grandma in my area, they are always going to vegetables, to their gardens, to do this, to do that, and then everything is gotten from the garden. Thereby, they are able to groom healthy herbs that helps them to even not age as much. In short, I have a woman who is over 60, going to 70, and then they will bring cake and she'll be forced to pound on the cake. And I'm like, you are old. You are going to have diabetes. She said, no, I know what to do. When I get home, I'm going to take a lot of herbs and flush away the sugar. So in the indigenous cultures, we have things like Ojula Ganya Agba Okinyenu. That means that an elder pays attention. They do not talk so much. Again, they say Agba King Paro. There's the belief that the elders don't lie. Let's take away politics and the political things that make elders to shift, but ordinarily, the elders are not expected to lie. As a result of that, they mark their words, they watch their words before they speak. So that gives them that place of regard, which shows that they also have the knowledge because they have been in this environment, they have been in these societies, so they know what pertains. So if our researchers, like I said, go to these elders who are the Kokogbons and the Ojuagbas, and they discuss with them, there will be less frustration in their projects, there will be less crisis in their project, and they will gain more knowledge because these elders share from their lived experiences. Yes, many of their ideas may not be researched, but their lived experiences is something we cannot discountenance. So in conclusion, final year students of university, I'm focusing on final year because in the final years, they usually go for projects. So this project, if we talk about Afrocentric universities, for instance, when I was writing my project, I wrote my project on something as not African as transgenderism. But guess what? My professors told me and said, how do we get the African value of this course? And then I went back to my societies. I began to ask them. I asked them critical questions that made them to realize that they actually have this in their society and they've been living with this kind of people. If you look at Wande Abibola's work on where he evaluated Halle Barren, you'll find out that they actually have people with differentiated bodies, people with different features and traits. And when you come out like that, they keep them special and treat them special. In short, sometimes they gain special attention. So this way, they will have the final year students will be able to create knowledge and understanding in that collaborates in understanding of their social experiences. This way, they will also get hands-on experiences of those Western notions and theories, and they will be able to add to knowledge. They can build on their thesis on it through indigenous evaluations and curriculum development for critical university studies across Africa. When they can do this through traditional rulers, the people, the Agbas that they can approach, traditional rulers, or the oldest people in societies and in families, they used to have certain secrets that they share. Sometimes it could be family secret that they share only with the family, or sometimes it's a social secret that they need to share with everyone. The most important thing is that usually a lot of them have secrets that were handed over to them by their forefathers, which they will not need to go away with, but they're only looking for somebody dedicated to do that. So instead of campus researches, we should do town square meetings just to have, we talked about World Cafe yesterday, thank you. So African theories for African universities as Afrocentric institutions will be well coordinated if they collaborate with the elders in their societies who are considered as Gupogbon. Finally, I would like to ask you, what research are you conducting now? How can you add the African context to your research? Can you help develop the African knowledge base in your research? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isoke. Some very provocative questions. The distinction between wisdom and knowledge, the question about how to include more African knowledge into our curricula. Next, we're going to hear from Simpiwe Zindani, who's speaking to us online. Thank you for your patience with our online troubles. And thank you, Isoke, for managing your talk.
Thank you.
Without your slides for everybody to share. Simpiwe is going to be speaking about Beyond the Great Divide, technology as a mean technology, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, as a means to revitalize the colonial curriculum discourse. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Just a few seconds while we wait for Simpiwe to get the technical access.
Okay, so now we need to figure out how to make, okay, stop sharing.
Maybe you had it on your system.
Okay, so there we go.
This afternoon I'm chairing a session on technology, which is unfortunate because
Thanks so much, Simpiwe. We could you try and speak so we can just check that we can hear you?
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I heard a little bit. Can you say that again?
Can you hear me? I can grab a headset quickly if I think that'll make it clearer.
No, you sound absolutely brilliant. It's just on this end that we need to put the speaker on so everyone else can hear you. But actually your voice comes through so clearly.
Okay, no problem.
Just give us a few seconds and then we'll also figure out how to. Can you share your camera?
I'm having issues with sharing my camera, but I'll try and share my PowerPoint. Let me see.
So just to set.
Okay. Is it visible on your guys' end? Okay, I think. Okay. You guys can just let me know when I can begin.
Simply
Yes.
move through your slides.
Okay. Okay, let's see. Okay. Okay. Seems I can see my slides, but I can't see my notes, which is strange. Let me see.
Just to warn you that we can see everything on your screen at the moment.
Oh, okay. No problem. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm just trying to see how I can share it and also see my notes. Let's see. Okay. There we go. Okay. Present to view. Okay. Okay. Can I begin?
Yes, please do.
Okay, cool. Okay. Okay. So, good day, everyone. So I will be presenting on effectively the use of technology as a means to kind of revitalize the decolonial curriculum discourse, particularly when it comes to this kind of idea of what an African university is. So, my point of departure effectively kind of comes from the idea that in South Africa, we're kind of coming to the 10-year anniversary of the Fees Must Fall protests as well as the Roads Must Fall protests. These protests were respectively, one of them was basically students kind of taking protest action or mobilizing against basically trying to get free education, and then that would be the Fees Must Fall. And then Roads Must Fall was one where basically we had South African universities effectively reckoning with their colonialist origins and discourses. So you found it a lot in universities that that are basically named after colonial founders, or where there was a strong kind of colonial link where through like statues and naming and things of that sort. So we saw kind of a huge wave of it in universities such as UCT, which had a statue of Cecil John Rhodes, and Rhodes University, where it's the namesake of Cecil John Rhodes. So, and during this time, actually, as part of these protests, there was also reckoning with the structures themselves, in students kind of pushing back and asking for more indigenized curricula and more Africanized curricula. And since then, this has kind of been a resurgent kind of conversation within academic circles as well as outside, as in that we've been kind of reckoning with what does that look like. And a lot of the time, it's a matter of kind of asking ourselves if it's a matter of adding more global Southern voices, or subtracting a lot more of the colonial texts that we often see as deem foundational. And effectively, what happens, and effectively then that's the layer, or that's effectively where the conversation stays. It kind of stays at the level of text. But now I wanted to kind of go a bit deeper and kind of ask ourselves what other avenues we can arrive at if we kind of pull away from this textualist conversation and we move towards kind of also understanding that the texts that we would be introducing are still effectively written texts. So it kind of works within this hierarchicalization of knowledge. And if we're going to allow for the basically bringing in of indigenous knowledge systems, we would need to then basically move away from that and ask ourselves how we can bring orality into the conversation, and oral text and oral storytelling and the knowledges that are basically baked within these traditions. And effectively from this then came this kind of idea of kind of exploring technology as a paradigm that we can maybe utilize in thinking about this conversation differently. So the technology paradigm was founded or coined by Russell Kashula and Andrew Mostert, and I propose it as a means to kind of reconsider how we can integrate traditional texts, traditions, and performances, as well as knowledge into the university, and basically understand them as legitimate sources of knowledge and that can help us basically bring forth this kind of decolonizing agenda, right? And basically, firstly, to understand the necessity of technology, it's good to kind of first acknowledge the dominance of written knowledge within academia. So this kind of idea that the written text is kind of seen as the be all and end all, and the only way in which people think. And if you think about it, this kind of draws back to the work of Walter Ong in basically in technologizing the written word. He often speaks about how the advent of writing kind of brings in this ability to have Sophia, right? And to now have knowledge, and it allows for abstraction and therefore for thought, for logical thought to happen. Now, what that suggests is that before written language, there is no abstraction and there is no logical thought happening. Orality is almost pushed into the realm of the past, the realm of mythology and superstition, etc., etc. And to kind of talk about this, I also draw on the writers and public intellectuals like Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who basically speak of writing as kind of being deeply embedded within this kind of process of colonization, and this kind of process of intellectual domination as well, right? Which resulted in the kind of marginalization of oral traditions, right, where oral traditions are pushed to the side and seen as primitive as compared to Western texts or Western styles of text, which is written, which are then seen as kind of markers of civilization and knowledge and advancement, etc., and enlightenment, right? And we kind of see that this persists within academia and within the university spaces as we continue, right? Now, if we are to think about it differently, right, the concepts of technology, to define technology, basically, it's the fusion of orality and literature, and the idea of, and this idea is it draws on basically literary and linguistic frameworks where instead of prizing the world of letters, where we kind of understand that literature is hierarchicalized and then orality is then pushed aside, they came up with the term orature, in which they kind of tried to place them on equal standing, and kind of seeing both as kind of valuable, etc., etc. And then Russell Kashula and Mostert then introduced the technological aspect. So technology being a way in which we can also, in a way, textualize oral text without then petrifying them through making them written texts. Basically, they propose it as a way to basically integrate modern oral traditions and create kind of more holistic and inclusive understandings of knowledge production, right? And it allows us to move beyond this idea or this binary of oral versus written, modern versus traditional, and allows for more fluid and dynamic process that can incorporate multiple forms, right? So in a sense, in the sense that it's been applied thus far, it's been applied more towards literary studies, especially, or basically recording and analyzing oral literature and oral traditions such as folk tales, songs, and proverbs, etc., etc. And then those kinds of are transferred into the university space, and then they can be studied in the way that they were. So it kind of preserves the performance, etc., etc. But it also offers a way to kind of integrate these traditions into the university curriculum by using these technologies to record, preserve, and share this oral knowledge. And in a sense, also because there's a way to kind of textualize them, we can kind of also see them as legitimate texts within the university space, right? And it pushes us to kind of start thinking about which fields lend themselves towards this. So in a way, we can kind of think of the field of history as one that we could do this in effectively, and also doing that, particularly with a field like history, would then challenge particular traditionalist understandings of historiography, right? Because there's this kind of idea that the written text is prized over an oral text, because the oral text is kind of seen not to have a sense of fidelity. But by incorporating kind of a technology paradigm, we can record them in a particular sense without having it to be kind of some written textualized form where it's like the diary of Jan van Riebeck, right? It can be recorded in the language that it comes from, with the immediacy, et cetera, and then preserved for future reference, but not in a way that kind of echoes a very colonialist dominant idea, right? Moving on. So also there's also this kind of idea of something that I try to kind of address or think about within this paper is also to think about this kind of decoloniality in some instances almost starts to become, or this decolonial curriculum conversation starts to become like this kind of exercise in decolonial arithmetic, where what we're finding is we're thinking about, do we subtract, do we add more text, et cetera, right? And in a way, it kind of then cheapens the entire affair, because it kind of becomes, okay, if I'm going to teach William Shakespeare or Shakespeare's The Tempest, then I have to teach Cesare's Un Temp as well. Or if I'm going to teach Jane Eyre, I have to teach White Sargasso Sea, et cetera. So it becomes those kinds of things. Or do I remove Shakespeare's The Tempest and then just teach Un Temp, and so on and so forth. So it kind of becomes that kind of superficial kind of conversation where there's no actual transformation within the system itself. But what we're finding is kind of this bickering and back and forth, and also this kind of idea where we're kind of also asking ourselves, is decolonizing, indigenizing, and is it Africanizing? And then it kind of becomes an issue of semantics, right? But we have scholars that kind of move beyond this kind of idea, where we have Formiam and Tefera, who argue that we must go beyond the inclusion of diverse content and then address the ideologies at work, right? And the legacies within the higher education that then reflect the colonial imposition, right? In other words, it's not enough to simply add more African authors, right, on your reading list. We must rethink the various ways in which knowledge is produced, transmitted, and validated. So this is where technology comes in, right? By integrating these kinds of traditions and performances into particular fields or into fields that allow it, and a lot of the humanities subjects allow us to do this, right? It helps us break beyond this kind of surface level idea or approach to decolonization. It also allows us to engage more deeply with the epistemological structures themselves, and also prevents this kind of epistemicide from happening, right? Because when we talk about colonization, we often kind of look at the physical violence or the kind of very, very visceral forms of violence, but we forget that there are also other kind of intangible forms of violence that we feel later, such as the loss of languages, the loss of culture, et cetera, right? And now next what I'll do is I'll just present a few cases in which they could be applied. One such one is basically the South African History Archive, where we have oral histories integrated, right? And they can be used for academic research and curricula, right? So SAHA has these oral history projects and focuses on documenting the lived experiences of South Africans, and it did that during apartheid and beyond, and it captured their narratives into history. So by documenting them, textualizing them, it allowed there to be reference to them. Another one would be to kind of integrate it within literature as well. That would be another one. So say, for example, we have an African literature course. We don't just have like Things Fall Apart or, you know, an Adichie novel or a Selo K. Dacre novel, but we also have perhaps oral narratives from each region that also kind of showcase a different kind of literary genius, right? Or a different kind of literary craft. And then we can start to understand then what are also indigenous African ways of storytelling, right? Another one is also to think about it in terms of studies such as like performance studies and so on and so forth, where we can incorporate earlier forms of dance, music, and oral poetry. Students could collaborate with local communities, et cetera, et cetera. It allows for opportunities for fieldwork and those types of things, right? And in doing this, there are also some profound pedagogical implications that can happen. So we can basically have a way in which we kind of move beyond kind of text-based kind of assessments such as essays in written form, but we can also encourage students to kind of adopt more multimedia forms in which they kind of also go out and capture local knowledges, et cetera, right? And this is supported by authors such as Wagid and Hibbert, who argue that decolonial pedagogy is more than just content, right? So about creating spaces where students can critically engage with oral and written knowledge, right? And by incorporating it into teaching practice, we create learning environments that basically reflect the diverse realities of our student base, right? But with this being said, there's also incorporating technology into pedagogical practice also presents a few challenges, right? One such challenge is this idea of academic intelligibility. And it's a question that kind of comes through even when we consider this idea of an African university, right? If we're creating a university that serves an African space, right, do we then depart from the idea of wanting to be intelligible within a global world, right? Because the idea now is that universities are kind of built in the mold of old world kind of universities. And so there's this kind of interesting kind of free flow where if you come from university in South Africa, it would be easy for you to go to Oxford, etc., and all those types of things. So as we kind of move into a direction of wanting to kind of create more African universities, what does that mean within a global world, etc., etc.? And that question itself comes with its own politics, right? This kind of idea of the global world, not the global world, but the global north itself never worries about being intelligible to anyone else, because through the colonial project, they are intelligible to us. So the question then is, should we care about that intelligibility, right? But it presents itself as a problem nonetheless, right? Because we have kind of this history of written text within the university, when we employ this kind of fluid context, right, then what is the impact of this kind of break from tradition? Right, that's one of the things that we must think about. Another is this kind of, sorry, just lost my place quickly, right? And there are authors that have kind of looked at this kind of this question, right? We have Mutungoza, who basically notes that this is like one of the major barriers that kind of effectively that the decolonial project faces. It's not only that question, but the implications of that question. So if we're not intelligible, then there's also kind of funding or resource implications there, right? Because that presents a barrier in terms of funding and resource, right? And then integrating technology, right, it may present that particular challenge, but there's also a way to leverage it, right? In kind of integrating technology and understanding that particular framework, we can also leverage this kind of multimedia and also multi-literacy that's coming through here, because students are not only like learning in a particularly established mode, but they're learning through you know, a new kind of innovative one, which can present more productive possibilities in future. So it's just going to be a matter of not only like change within the university, but within like structures that then support the university. So institutions that offer funding to students, et cetera, and also that offer research grants, et cetera. They would have to also move within this new kind of paradigm and way of thinking. That's okay. Okay, covered that. Okay, so to close it off, I basically presenting technology as a way to kind of think differently about textuality, and also how deep we are talking about the decolonial conversation when we are having it. Is it just a matter of decolonial arithmetic, or are we challenging ourselves to go further and to consider other possibilities, other frameworks, and other ways of incorporating different knowledges and different literacies into what we would think of as the future African university? Yeah, that's it from my end. Sorry about all of the technical difficulties.
Hello, can it be heard? Hello? Hello, can you hear me? Yes, so what should I do? Am I the one presenting now? I cannot hear you. I cannot hear anybody. Hello, guy. I can't hear anybody. Can you hear me? So what should I do? Should I continue or what? Should I present? Hello, should I don't know how to, because I can't get any feedback from anybody. So, guys, are you able to see my screen? And should I continue speaking? Because I don't get any feedback. What is the way forward now? I can't hear anybody speaking. Should I just present or what is it?
I can hear you, so I don't know what others may be doing, but I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, that's brilliant, Titus. Thank you so much for your patience. We've managed to get the sound right. Can you just check that your slides can move forward and back?
Where's my slide again?
We can see your slides and they're gorgeous. We're very, very excited. Can you check that it can move forward and back? From one slide to the another, can you just check if it can move?
Actually, when
So
I put on Unfortunately, when I put on the slide, I can't see my slide anymore.
All right, so it's better, I think, if you share your screen rather than share your slides.
Okay. Can you see my slide now? Yes, I can move. Let me see. I can move, yes.
Perfect. Yeah, fantastic. I'm going to hand you over to the chair now, Titus, but it is wonderful. And thank you, everybody, for your patience. I'm going to hand you over to the chair.
Good afternoon and good morning. Thank you so much for your patience, both inside the room.
Speak up a bit next to the microphone.
What? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, a bit far.
Okay, I'm going to try speak a little louder.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Great. Thank you very much to everyone in the room and to everybody online for your patience. We've been navigating some technical difficulties. It's always difficult being, as I said to our room, it's always difficult being the first session in a conference because that's where all the problems come up and get sorted. So we very much appreciate your patience. To all of our listeners and to all of our presenters, I just want to say that Simpiwe, your presentation was wonderful, and we're going to have time to have a discussion with questions and answers, and hopefully some robust discussion after Titus's presentation. Titus is presenting today on decolonizing the mind through critico-creative education. Please go ahead, Titus. We'll keep time. You have 20 minutes. And thereafter, we will have a group discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, members and colleagues. And welcome to this presentation, which is entitled Decolonizing the Mind Through Critical Creative Education. So as I introduce this topic, I will say that a well-balanced education that prepares Africans to live confidently as Africans in today's globalized world is a prerequisite for developing an active and responsible citizenry. In this regard, this presentation is about imaging Africa through an education that insists on developing critical and creative thinking. The aim is to build a positive African image, an image that has suffered or has been distorted by slavery, colonialism, and blinding prejudice. This presentation is based on my publication, which is called Critical and Creative Education for the New Africa, which was published in 2023. And I think you can see that the book is available online as well. And you can see it's about reinventing Africa. And the aim is to induct a new cohort of dedicated professionals guided by material gain, not by material gain and power, but by personal commitment in building a better society. It's about an education that develops responsible citizens inspired by the desire to serve their fellow men and women. People who can contribute their time and talents to make society a better place in which to live. Unless we are empowered by an education tailored to address our needs, we cannot be effective participants in bringing about constructive change. And therefore, this book, which you see there, examines some of the key critical areas on which African countries need to focus their attention. And the book has listed some of those particular areas, including poverty eradication, combating corruption, peace, security and development, democracy and constitutionalism, good governance, social justice, and globalization. So basically, I will give a brief background why this is important, why I came up with this kind of work. And I will say that African history is marked by cruelty and violence, dehumanization and exploitation. due to largely slavery, the slave trade and colonization. In some contexts, Black Africans continue to face racial discrimination and contempt in other parts of the world. And I think you have seen this happening in some countries, including the United States of America and other Western countries. Consequently, some of the African talents are hardly recognized by non-Africans. So you might have some ideas of invention, including the one for HIV/AIDS, but because probably we are not much recognized, it is taken by the Western world, and they take the at times in European history, for example, Blackness has signified inferiority, insecure consciousness, precarious existence, powerlessness, ignorance, filth, poverty, and backwardness. If you read some European books, you'll find that at the times we are even told that Africans don't have a history, and African people cannot have the power to think. Some philosophers like Immanuel Kant said that Africa is historyless, and an African person has no capacity to think. This pejorative interpretation of Blackness have left many of us with inner fears, outward distortion, and a stigma of degradation. Hence, many of us may often feel ashamed of ourselves, including some of our Black ladies who try to bleach to look like the white persons. And some of us are not comfortable even speaking in front of places where we've got international dignitaries because of that, what we call the pejorative interpretation of our color. After independence, most of our leaders also became dictatorial and coercive, and hence continue to rob us of our confidence and self-significance. The failure of many of our independent states to be self-reliant politically, socially, and economically heighten our sense of insignificance, because we cannot determine our destiny, and therefore you cannot cast a hand that fits you. And that means that we have to rely on the Western world for many things, including the education systems, how they work. Sometimes some of us Africans attribute our failure to being Africans instead of taking responsibility to address the many challenges we face and to make the situation better. Some of our leaders also spend a lot of time engaging in blame games, transference of responsibility, rhetoric, and propaganda. They do so to conceal some of our realities which are affecting us, including poverty, disease, corruption, political instability, economic meltdown, instead of honestly admitting that these are real problems that need to be tackled amicably and by honest and relevant means. And therefore, I believe that this critical creative education can be one of the means to address our predicaments. And thus, it is our responsibility to overcome this negative attitude so that we can redefine our history and develop a positive image of ourselves rooted in our intrinsic significance. Black Africans should be aware of their resourcefulness and understand that there is no correlation between skin pigmentation and intelligence, because ontologically, all human beings are considered the same way, with the same spiritual and material components. Critical creative education is about critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, communication, and collaboration, some of the key aspects which have been integrated into the 21st century skills, which all education systems should promote. CCE endeavors to create a challenging and engaging learning environment in which students become lifelong learners. It views students as active active participants in the teaching learning process, rather than as passive recipients who just need to be taught through a banking approach in terms of depositing knowledge and not engaging with such knowledge. It advocates for a democratic classroom environment where criticisms and divergent opinions are respected, and where diversity is seen as a spice of life rather than a threat. It embraces a person-centered curriculum in which attention to each individual student is enhanced. The aim is to equip learners with the relevant skills, knowledge, values, and attitude to respond appropriately to the everyday realities of the world. It also aims at helping students to develop vision and the capacity to reflect on situations, imagine possibilities, and initiate relevant and responsible action that can transform situation and improve the conditions of the society. Some of the teaching strategies which we should enhance through this education, including student-centered approaches, where the teacher is basically a facilitator or a guide, what we now currently call the competency-based curriculum. We should engage teaching and learning approaches that are active, which include things like teaching others or application of knowledge and skills. Critical thinking and creativity should be enhanced, and also the aspect of problem solving. What are some of the options which you can actually choose from? I think some of us have been talking about project-based learning. We talk about interactive lectures, not these lectures where the lecturer use yellow notes and then they say they have taught and learning has taken place. Use of dialectics, which involves argumentation in order to defend their position. Think, pair, share, involving personal reflection, sharing with another colleague, and also sharing with the main group. Community service learning, which involves integrating community service, reflection, and learning as we engage in our learning so that learning becomes more relevant. Project-based learning, very important. Instead of having basically exams-oriented curriculum, enable people to engage in projects that addresses problems in the society. And the issue of coaching, mentorship, and also role-playing. As I conclude, I will say that a critical and creative analysis of African historical context is important because it will show how changing historical circumstances demand new and creative responses, and this will help us to produce fresh way to act in present-day situations. Fair-minded historical analysis allows us to appreciate both the good and the bad points and the mistake of our past so that we can review and adjust and find approaches relevant for present and future contexts. Through critical creative education, though critical creative education cannot offer magic solution to African many problems, it has the capacity to develop people who are critical and creative, people who are able to perceive, interpret, reflect, and analyze situations, and then apply their acquired knowledge and skills creatively to transform the world around them. Critical education is an approach through which Africans can imagine better alternatives and initiate relevant action to confront the many socio-political and economic challenges that face them. Therefore, education syllabi at every level in Africa should include aspects of critical and creative thinking. This should be fostered from the early stages of children's learning, right up to courses in higher education institutions, where it has a more developed role. And when we integrate this, we are going to really help ourselves because we realize the paradox of Africa, where we are very rich with resources, but we are also very poor because we still depend that we cannot determine our destiny. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Let us continue the conversation.
Thank you very much, Titus. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. Can we move the camera so that it's facing the audience? You have a enraptured audience who really enjoyed your presentation. We're going to turn the camera so you can see everybody. I want to open up a discussion about the three presentations that we've heard this morning. Isoke's discussion of wisdom and knowledge and how to incorporate these distinctions into our curricula. Simpiwe's discussion on technoriate, the intersection of morality and literature, the discussion of oral versus written forms of knowledges, and how to capture oral knowledge, African knowledge, without petrifying it in many of the ways that written knowledge often comes to be formed. And finally, Titus's presentation about different practical ways that we can think of to encourage critical and creative methods of education. And I personally, Titus, took a slide of one of your pages because some of the suggestions that you have for classroom-based interactions are very helpful just to me personally as a lecturer. So does anybody have any questions, comments that they'd like to direct towards our discussants? Great. I'll move the microphone around.
I'm called Vincent Abigaba, and I'm a PhD student. I'm Makerere here. First of all, I would like to thank the presenter for the good presentation. I think it sounds quite very good and quite relevant. But my question is, the first question is about the aid. We are very much aware that neocolonialism is associated with giving aid. And in terms of aid in support of our education system, it has been basically conditional and on how to frame the curriculum and even the methods of delivery. So the question is, in this package, are we going to have an element where aid is going to be minimized or rejected in this case, especially in the event that our status as African, we will need funding irrespective of the source based on our challenges, financial challenges that we have. Number two, assuming that this package requires huge amounts of money in terms of budgetary process, to what strategies are in place to ensure that it will be properly funded and then rolled out? I submit.
Please go ahead and respond, Titus. And please unmute yourself so we can hear you. Any other questions in the meantime? Yes.
Okay, I want to thank the presenter for the good presentation. Maybe I want to talk about where he has said that we should embrace our culture by using the local available materials. That is in Africa. I'm thinking about students in Africa, and I'm talking on behalf of Kenya, whereby you find we have introduced the competence CBC. And we are teaching students to use local materials, like we go to the field, we get the grass to make brooms. And currently, we are moving with the technology. So I'm imagining how relevant is it when we use the grass rather than using other technologies, we have a technology whereby we use something like to siphon dust in the house. What about if we use the modern technology rather than using brooms? How relevant is it when we stick to our local materials? I'm just trying to compare the two. Maybe you can elaborate on that. And also I was thinking that when other countries, the Western countries, they're teaching their students to use robots, as we are teaching our students to use the local materials. How relevant is it? Thank you.
Titus, would you like to answer those two questions?
Hello?
Yes. We have two questions. The first one was about different forms of aid that are attached, aid and funding that are attached to knowledge production. And the second one was about the distinction between local versus global forms of knowledge, and sometimes how global knowledges or Western knowledges might be beneficial in local contexts.
Okay. I'll start with the last one, whereby you talk about robotics, and we are busy with the local materials. I will say that we are encouraged to think globally and act locally, and therefore we cannot try to have a knowledge that is compartmentalized. The knowledge we are producing should be universally usable, and that's what we can also compete with our neighbors. So I will say that when you talk about use local knowledge, we are simply trying to say that sometimes you want to teach something and maybe it is too expensive to have it. The important thing is that we can improvise, at least for learning to take place. But I think also we are thinking about also Africans, as we know our history, we had an oral culture where most of our knowledge was not documented, and therefore we lost a lot. And therefore we are trying to challenge our African scholars to try now to document a lot of writings about African things and African culture and education, so that at least we cannot lose our culture as well. But I think what I'm saying is that we should have what is called an international consciousness, whereby we must be able to compete with the world. Otherwise, we'll continue remaining behind. Things will be manufactured and also innovated in the West, and ours will be just to use them, just like telephones. I don't know how many countries in this continent are manufacturing telephones. I heard Rwanda started making some Silicon Valley manufacturing phones. So you find that the manufacturing is in China and the users are more in Africa, who are using the phones and they even forget speaking. Even in class, people are busy with phones. So I'm challenging ourselves that we must think globally, but act locally, but we must also invest in research. Most universities or institutions of learning, there's no money for local research. What you are told is that you have to look for funding to get what is called, to get promotion, maybe as a professor. When we keep on thinking about looking for money from other people to assist us in our knowledge production, then we'll continue to be inferior. So I'm challenging our institutions, our leaders of institutions, that let's invest more in research and in innovation so that we can empower our students and our scholars to invest, to innovate, so that we can create something of value. Thank you.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Isoke is going to respond to the first question about the relationship between aid and funding and knowledge production.
Thank you. We have a challenge. It's apparent that we have a challenge in this part of the world. There's no way we can, at the rate, in my opinion, at the rate at which the Western world has developed, we can't stay alone. Just like he just talked about thinking globally and acting locally. So when you talk about funding, the people that are providing funds have what they want to the funds to be used for. So I would like suggest maybe as a researcher, you know, you can take out time do the funds, because most of our universities are not funding this project. If they were funding this project, we would have progressed beyond this now. So, but I think that as a researcher, even if I get international funding and I go to those places, at a point I have to begin to think, how can I apply this locally? How can I come back and apply this locally to my environment and to my culture? You know, and then talking about the issue of technology and the gap between technology, using local items, and you know, the world has developed into robots and all that stuff. It's also the same thing. While first of all, you know, intellectually now, most of us, we are bowing to things like ChatGPT, and that's not productive. It's not productive. You let ChatGPT think for you. At a point, you're not going to be able to think yourself. And we already have a gap in knowledge in Africa. Why would you allow technology to think for you? Technology can guide you. Yes, use Google Scholar, you have references, but we got to, as researchers, we have to take our time, sit down and think for ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions?
Thank you. I do not have a question, but a comment to the last and second presentation. The second presentation, to me, got me into thinking about bringing the augmented reality to the context in which we are promoting. Well, like Pacho said, that you can actually teach globally, but you need to act locally. And that can be answered by bringing augmented realities in our classrooms, in our environment, and in our discussions. Now, to the last presenter, I do see a need for capacity building, because we seem to be talking about, we seem to know what we want, how to get there. But then how do we streamline the implementation? Because universities do operate within a structure and policy guidelines and so forth. How about when we think about having a pivotal role where we can have an overseer to oversee the implementation of the transformative curriculum that we are preaching about. In this case, I do tend to think about the discourse surrounding the teaching and learning centers, where we can talk about the curriculum reform, redesigning programs, and integration of African values and knowledge within our programs, within our course units, and so we can actually teach by real life examples within our context. And also when we talk about the technology, we can use the technology to actually make us critically think, to look for the examples that we can bring on board to facilitate learning from an Afrocentric perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to first of all thank the first discussant. She was really so good, but the speed was so fast. But I tried to pick something. She said that elders pay attention, they don't talk too much. That touched me so much, and I feel I also copy up the same. But my concern is on the second discussant. He talked about the technology. I failed to mention that word. And I now pose a question. How do you define technology? And what specific technologies do you see as the most impactful in this context? And question 2, are there specific case studies or examples where technology has effectively revitalized the decolonial curriculum? And what were the outcomes? Thank you.
Thank you so much, our discussants for today. My contribution to this. One is Africa, it's part of the entire globe. So my fear which I'm having is that, being that currently the agenda in the world is to form the world to become like a global village. So if we decolonize and we do our own unique kind of training or approach to our own issues, do you think there is high chances of us being left behind? Because we need to have an approach whereby we are moving towards the current agenda which is happening in the world. Yes, African knowledge is so wonderful, but as one of the colleagues said earlier, we still also need to copy a little bit of what's happening in other countries. Like, for example, the Eastern Asia, specifically China. I understand their history. They used to take their children to America to study for so many years. So as to Gandhi, copy the American technology. Then they could take back to China, and they studied the innovation hubs, etc., which now developed into an industry. So the point which I'm making here is that I think it requires critical thinking, it requires a planning process. It shouldn't be a rush. It requires more collaboration with different stakeholders, because aspect of leadership matters here. Because currently in Africa, the challenge we have are different projects. For example, road construction, railway, standard gauge railway. It's given to the Chinese, it's given to foreigners. So you may generate a knowledge here, but still, if the leadership does not embrace it, it may not be in use. They will still continue to use engineers and companies from abroad so as to solve African challenges. Thank you so much.
We have 2 more questions, so I'm going to just open up those 3 for discussion. We had a comment/question about perhaps ways of thinking about implementing some of the African knowledges that we're speaking about. We had 2 questions about technoriate strategies for decolonizing education and education discourse, which we've taken down because our second discussant seems to not be online at the moment, but we really do want him to answer them. And then now we have a question about how we can usefully take knowledge from different parts of the world and apply them in local contexts in ways that are meaningful. As Prof. Kampala has often said, we're creating knowledge from the continent rather than about the continent. And perhaps that can help us to think through this conversation. But Titus, is there anything you'd like to share here?
Oh yeah, thank you very much. I think the first question about implementation was very important for me as well. Let me tell you, colleagues, one of the challenges of our problem is leadership. In our institution, for example, you can have very good ideas, very brilliant, but there is no institutional support. What happens is that our institutions are based on ethnic and discriminative policies, whereby the leaders, they promote or give position to their friends and their brothers and sisters. So when you go with a new idea, there's no support. And therefore, what happened with that idea? You end up probably having it yourself or trying to use it somewhere else. So unless we change our mentality to see that everybody should be based on merit, treat people with merit and justice, then we won't move by implementing these particular things. So leadership crisis is one of the biggest problems of Africa, not only in our countries, but also in our higher education institutions. So what we can do, for example, I think the speaker mentioned some issues. We need to have things like what is called incubation hubs, places where people can actually come and discuss about innovation. Many universities don't have places for incubation. So you have an idea, but nobody's helping you to make it to maturity. We need to have centers of excellence in our institution or in our countries, whereby you are an excellent maybe in STEM, you are an excellent in the robotics, so that at least through that we can be able to spread the gospel. When somebody talked about China constructing our railways, it's very sad, and that is the reality. Even here in Kenya, where I come from, good roads are constructed by Chinese. Yet every year we have people graduating with degree in engineering. When you give them the job, they do very shoddy work. So what is the problem? One, our graduates are half-baked. They are taught in theories more than in practical. So the challenge still goes to our institution that let us have infrastructure that can enable our graduates to be able to apply the knowledge and skills they are learning. Because even in my university, you have an engineering department, but students cannot even construct a simple bath, and people keep on giving them degrees. So unless we teach people what is practical and applicable and can realistically address our problem, we still go to China. We still remain babies who are still crawling and cannot walk. So let us challenge our educational institutions, the government, to invest more in education so that our graduates can get degrees which can easily be usable to our countries to construct our roads. Otherwise, for the education in Chinese and Western world, when you are still young, you specialize from a young age. A young Chinese student will start making phones, but here we only know how to use them. So we need to have a total paradigm shift on the way we educate our young people. Otherwise, the problem will continue and we will continue lamenting. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take one more round of questions and then we're going to break for lunch. So it was you and then you.
Thank you so much. My contribution goes to the first presenter. In Africa, we have a vast rivers, lakes of knowledge raining from our elders. Take an example from Uganda. In the central region, it is common to say that Elisoli omukulu awaddugala we walaba. Meaning that for an elder, their eye will always see where there is darkness. That is wisdom. When you look at the scientific bit of it, we have very many herbalists who over and over have showed us that they can manage these ailments that have been in our society. But when you ask them where they get this knowledge from, they will tell you, I used to walk with my grandmother to go to the forest. I walked with my uncle to go to the mountains. So they transferred this knowledge to the young people who are today using that to not only make a living, but help the society. But my concern is, it is in record in this country that there was a time when the locals, whom we call the Mulelwa in Uganda, used to help expectant mothers to give birth. However, out of research, it had shown that they were not contributing to well-being of these mothers. So they underwent training. When they were trained, it took the government 10 years to come back and revisit what the training had impacted on these local Mulelwa. However, it showed that it had only reduced maternal death by 0. something. Because of that research revealing, these people were stopped from attending to these pregnant mothers. As I speak, these locals are working in hiding, which makes the situation even worse. If we only brought the locals back on board and incorporated what we think is colonial with the cultural, I think we would have something better. fighting what is present today might not help us, but if we incorporated the knowledge that we already had as Africans, we would have a better outlook of what our healings would do. That is my input. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like very much to appreciate our presenters, and I have a question to our first presenter. So you talked about Ogbon Agba. I do not know if I've pronounced it well. And she has actually spoken it is a proverb, a Luganda proverb, which kind of re-echoes that concept that of the elders are wise, wisdom of the ancients, and that kind of thinking. So, however, I have a question. So in promoting African epistemologies, really, how do we avoid falling into ethnocentrism? Like, given, for example, our country here in Uganda, we have 50 indigenous groups, cultural groups. You can tell us more about how many exist in Nigeria. And so how do we avoid descending into ethnocentrism as we drive forward the agenda of Afrocentrism? We have 50 cultural groups or 50 ethnic groups. Yeah, tribes. So how do we avoid, practically speaking, ethnocentrism, falling into ethnocentrism and things like tribalism, marginalization, as we drive forward the agenda of Afrocentrism? Thank you.
Thank you. These are some lovely questions that are espousing the tensions between building an Afrocentric university or curriculum without, for example, entering into the ethnocentrism or tribalism that threatens to accompany that if we don't do it intelligently and wisely. Is that okay?
Thank you very much. Okay, let me answer the last question. Talking about ethnocentrism and not descending into that. Okay, like somebody asked me, I don't know if it's you today during the, okay, he asked me how many languages we have in Nigeria, and I said 250. I have researched it. It's actually more than that, but these are the surviving languages. And this language I'm using to teach you, it's not my language, but I grew up in Lagos and I can speak Yoruba very well. So what they do in Nigeria is this. In each environment, in each culture, people begin to teach from primary school, they teach their children in their languages. So you can find, if you go to local schools, they'll teach their children in their languages. And as they develop to secondary schools, at a point they stop and they go to university and the children have to survive on their own. So the question is this, which is a response to a previous conversation. You as a facilitator, can you think in your language? It's very critical. For instance, I saw a post, the Yoruba language is very progressive and it's been studied abroad. I attended a conference sometime in June, Lagos Association Conference, and this Caucasian came and greeted me, Ekaro. And I'm like, Shogbo Yoruba ni, oni mo gbo dada. Moni call Yoruba. Good morning. Can you speak Yoruba? Yes, I can. How do you learn Yoruba? University of Kansas. They have a study center where they teach Yoruba language. That's because the Yoruba people have taken time to develop their language. So you as a facilitator, you as a faculty, you as a lecturer, are you developing your language? Can you think in your language? Now, those courses that you are teaching, is it possible for you to develop a word for it in your language? Because if you're able to do that, it will help the thinking process. What Yorubas do is that they just have a word for machine. They call machine oko. So if they want to call phone, they will say oko or oro. They will say phone for a machine for word, machine for teaching. They just use one word and they progress like that. So all our languages can be done like that if we progress. And then you have a lot of stations. People are now developing radio stations where they speak only their languages. And this is helping the languages not to be extinct, because I told you we have more than 250 languages, but these are the only surviving ones. So for your language not to be extinct, it's your duty as an intellectual to think in your language and develop materials in your language. That's the only way your language will not get extinct. I think I've addressed that. Then the other question is about, you observed about elderly perception and all that stuff. Because the elders are regarded, because they are reverenced and everything, so it becomes a thing of pride to be an elder. So if you're an elder in those cultures, you don't just release your words, you don't talk anyhow. Because if you are discounted or somebody counters you, especially a younger person, it's looked as disrespect, and you've lost that reverential position. So you have to wait and study before you speak, even if you don't know what to say. Well, your lived experience can give you an idea of what to say in certain circumstances. Okay, so I've talked about us thinking in our languages. It's very important for us to be able to think in our languages. It's very important. For instance, among Yorubas, one of my professors in philosophy, she was able to detect physics from Ifa oracle. So, madam, we can say these people are, they are archaic, they are this, they are that. It's because somebody has not studied it. They've not studied this. If this woman has been able to study the Ifa oracles and the significance of numbers among the Yorubas. So if you go to their markets, they have things where the forces are located. They have the concept of 4, the concept of 16. For instance, if you want to marry a Yoruba person, they will tell you to bring 40 pieces of yam. Those 40 pieces, many people don't know the importance of those 40 pieces. Actually, those 40 pieces represent their 40 gods, and 1 yam is for each god. So when you are a Christian and you want to escape it, you bring less than 40. But basically, what I'm just trying to say is this, is the fact that we need to think in our languages. We need to be able to develop our points in our languages. Then there's one more thing I wanted to say. Yes, we are the promoters of our languages, how to develop our languages. Yes, the government policies. Sometime before COVID, the government of Lagos State legalized traditional practitioners. The government, in short, if we celebrate Christmas, we celebrate Muslim holiday, there's a day set aside for traditional religion. So whatever religion you want to practice, you go and celebrate on that day. What am I saying? We have to be patient with our government to recognize the importance of these people. For instance, in conception and birthing of children, there are women that can naturally, they are unable to birth children and they have to do CS for them. We have a culture in the Delta region of Nigeria, there are rivers. Those people, they know how to help a woman whose baby is breached to turn the baby, and the baby is able to come out well. So it's your duty as a researcher, a medical person, go and intern with them. Let them work together. Let our local people and the traditional people work together so that there will be progress for African studies. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our presenters, and thank you to all of our attendees this morning. I first want to thank you all for your patience during a very trying opening conference session, and for rallying and for engaging in a meaningful, interesting discussion with our participants about their different presentations. There are some really useful contributions here that I hope we can take forward into the next session and into our engagements with each other informally. I'm going to ask Dina to share Simpiwe's email address in the chat so that anybody who would like to receive his slides and would like to engage with him with questions about his presentation, or even just to email him to let him know whether you enjoyed it, would be very appreciated, because he didn't have any contact with us as his audience. And I think that he ended up leaving the chat because he wasn't sure what was going on. Thank you all very, very much. It's been a pleasure engaging with all of you. Thank you, Titus, for your patience online. And we look forward to presentations in session 2 after lunch. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao. Nice lunch.